Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And we're the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
Back to true form. No
Truest
special
form.
episode. The truest episode. No special episode. No guests. Just a traditional core Classic Gaming Brothers episode.
Yes, back to the way we've always done it. I mean, wasn't last episode pretty? Oh no, it was our 2026.
It was our annual Bawoopa.
We changed things up.
20 Bawoopas. I don't know. So anyway, yeah. So how's the year been kicking off for you?
It's been kicking off, that's for sure. Bottom of the fifth in halftime. The ball's in the court, kicking off.
Are you trying to be topical or?
I was trying to make sports.
References?
Yeah, I was trying to do sports references, but it's not. I don't know anything about sports.
I've watched a season of Ted Lasso, so I'm pretty much a soccer specialist now.
Oh, you are an expert in soccer. Yeah.
Yes, or as they like to call it in Europe, football. That's right.
World Cup is coming to New England.
Oh yes, I know what that is.
Yeah.
Does the Premier League play in the World Cup?
That's a question that's going out to our listeners.
Or maybe I'll learn as I watch more episodes of Ted Lasso.
Nice. It's going to be great to tie that into today's episode, which has nothing to do with soccer or sports.
Could have.
But the members of the X-Men could form a sports team. They got enough.
Yeah, I think they have.
Well, yeah, they play like basketball together, but I mean,
are we talking about the full membership of this X-Men?
Oh, well, like the original roster, definitely not. That's like what, only like
that's
5
like a
people?
Basketball team, right? According to NBA Jam.
I mean, the full X-Men rosters. That's well enough for a couple of sports teams, I assume.
That's right. Assuming they're all alive.
Yes, yeah. Well, ideally, you want your players to be alive when you're doing.
I know, but sometimes the X-Men aren't.
That's true. It depends on how they're feeling.
That's right, and whether or not they have their powers, or whether they're part of blue team, gold team, red team.
Right. X Factor. But before we get into X-Men, Seth, what have you been recently playing?
Well, I have a couple of things now that I'm just remembering it. Recently, a couple episodes ago, I was talking about the Outer Worlds 2, or you were talking about the Outer Worlds 2? You were talking about the Outer Worlds 2 as you're recently played, and in it, I said that you could put on a skeleton helmet. And what I really meant was a scarecrow helmet. So that is a correction that I just want to put down for the record. And I also have a game alert for beating another game. I win, and we don't have any sort of fun announcement music for when I beat games. Also, I noticed that you don't announce when you beat games either.
I mean, it happens I think the same frequency as you beating games. So.
Oh, nice. The game I beat was The Drifter. It's a adventure game that I think I talked about relatively recently as a recently played.
Yeah, a few episodes back.
I actually beat it over holiday break, and it took me about 13 or so hours, and it was a really fun game. It starts off really good with a story that hooks you and is interesting and riveting about an unhoused individual who is going through the world, and there is a mystery that occurs, and you unravel that mystery, and then it takes on an entirely different take of a game later on in the game, like the back half of the game. It's just like the mystery is revealed, and it's just as weird as if it wasn't revealed. In fact, unrevealing the mystery makes it more weird, which is a good thing. So if you like weird adventure games and good stories, definitely a cool concept with the Drifter, and I would recommend checking it out, especially if you like some light sci-fi elements to it.
Great.
Recently, I've been playing The Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, which was developed by Questline and published by Awakened Realms and released back in May of 2025. It's a first-person open-world RPG that's set in a weird Arthurian time where there's magic and curses and plagues, which I'm sure those plagues back in the Arthurian times, but these plagues in this time are worse in a magical way. And there's like these red priests that try to cure people, and they do a really bad job at curing people, as in they torture people. It's vaguely like Skyrim or Oblivion, I think would probably be more of its contemporary. And just like Oblivion, you start in a prison. And you have to escape the prison using Skyrim lockpick mechanics. And I got about an hour into the game, and I just got to the end of the starting dungeon. I also like to explore things pretty thoroughly. It's got Skyrim, Elder Scrolls type vibes to it if it was a little jankier than the Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
Which, if you're familiar with Elder Scrolls, are kind of janky to begin with. So if you dial up the jank just a little bit more, you'll kind of get a feel for the Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon. I don't know if I could give a really heartfelt recommendation right now because I haven't progressed far enough into the game, because so far my only experience is exploring a starting dungeon, which if that was the end of the game, probably wouldn't recommend it. So I want to make sure that I can unpack more of the game before I make any sort of recommendations. But the game is like technically sound. It's not like janky that like weird stuff happens. It's more like janky, like it feels like it was made for a different time, which I guess Skyrim kind of feels like that too if you go back and play, or even like Oblivion if you go back and play the original and not the 100 remasters that are available. So anyway, yeah, so that's Tainted Grail of the Fall of Avalon, and I'll give him an more updated kind of take on it as I progress farther into the game. Zach,
Yes, Seth.
what have you been playing?
Seth, recently I've been playing a game called Nox Archaeist, which I picked up during the GOG sale, not the Steam winter sale, though they usually coincide with each other. I believe Nox Archaeist is also available on Steam. It was a game developed in 2020 by a company called 6502 Workshop, who are not the same as 6502 Collective, who are the people that made Trophy, a game that we played for the NES. Nox Archaeist, in fact, is an RPG built for the Apple II. The GOG version, and I think the Steam version, though I only own the GOG version, comes with both a copy of the game that runs in an emulator and also the original discs. So if you want to make floppies of the game onto actual 5 1/4 floppy disks, you can do so. And I may in fact do so. I do have some blank 5 1/4s sitting at my desk, so I might load them onto an actual disc. I also recently upgraded my Apple IIe to have a VGA card, so it can now output VGA, and looks a lot nicer on my VGA compatible monitor as opposed
That's
to
exciting.
As opposed to using the composite video out that it used to use. Also, my composite out on my Apple II was a little busted, so now I have like a dedicated video signal, which is nice. But Nox Archaeist is probably like the perfect game to try out with this new VGA card. It's a brand new, at least as of 2020, tile-based RPG similar to Ultima, where you are sent to investigate a cult in the world of Valley, VALI. And it's a pretty neat game. Despite being built for an older system, it does have some, what I feel to be a bit more modern gameplay elements. For example, it has a tutorial at the beginning of the game, which not a lot of games made in the 80s had. Usually all the instructions were printed in a manual. So it's nice to start a game out on, an old system and have it walk you through how to play the game. It gives you, the directional keys. It tells you what buttons to press to cast spells, what buttons to press to open items, what buttons to press to talk to people, what buttons to press to attack things. I haven't gotten super far into it, but I've been playing a bit of it through the emulator that it comes bundled with, though I am probably going to spend some time making copies of the game onto disc so that I can play it on real hardware. It might be 8 discs. It's a chunky Apple II game, so I might need to spare up 4 blank floppies, which I should have, but that does also require me to, fun fact, the floppy disks that I tend to get for my Apple II are write protected on one side, so I do have to de-write protect them, so to speak, which means I take a hole punch and I punch through the floppy. But in any case, I like Nox Archaeist so far. I think it's a really cool game. It is available again on GOG and Steam. And if you don't have an Apple II, that's fine because you can just play it using the emulator. One fun fact, and I haven't gotten to this point of the game yet, is that it features 2 cameos from real people. Steve Wozniak shows up as an NPC, and Richard Garriott in character as Lord British shows up as an NPC.
I don't think Richard Garriott is ever in character as Richard Garriott.
Yeah, I think Richard Garriott is always Lord British.
Yeah, including in his real life.
But yeah, Lord British and Steve Wozniak both show up as NPCs in the game, and you can talk to them. And that's a little cool. Lord British being obviously major reason we have Ultima, and Steve Wozniak being the reason we have the Apple II. That's Nox Archaeist. And again, available on GOG. I think it usually sells for about $20, but I got it on sale. So if you're interested, you can pick it up on sale.
Cool.
Well, to get into today's episode, and we've alluded to it already, we're going to be talking about the X-Men, and talking about some games that feature the X-Men.
X-Men.
That's right. So I got the thought to do this.
Did I sound like the arcade?
X-Men.
And then they show the best team of X-Men.
They do, yeah. We'll talk about that arcade game. It's a great game. I got the thought to do this episode because I saw the teaser for Avengers Doomsday, which features X-Men in it. One of the more recent teasers as of the recording of this episode features Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier, Ian McKellen as Magneto, and then a quick glimpse of James Marsden as Cyclops in his comic-accurate costume complete with the yellow bandolier, and a Sentinel walking in the background of the trailer for a split second. But I was looking back at our episodes and I realized we've never really talked about X-Men standalone. We've talked about, I think, almost every game that came out in the classic X-Men series, apart from like the ones that came out in the 2000s. So
I thought we had an X-Men episode.
We didn't do an X-Men episode.
I feel like we talked through every game that the X-Men had.
Because for a while, I would give you a retro rewind of an X-Men game, and you would give me a retro rewind.
I wanted you to play through every single X-Men game.
Yeah, and then you kind of fell off of that.
No, we got to where the X-Men game started to become bad.
Oh yeah.
Or worse, I guess.
So we never actually talked about X-Men as a whole. And what we'll do is we'll do our usual thing, break down who the X-Men are, what their history is, and kind of their early games. And we'll probably stray away from the later games because I didn't really play anything post. Actually, I kind of stopped playing X-Men games around the time the movies came out. I didn't pick up any of the newer stuff, or the newer as of that time. So what would an episode of our podcast be if we didn't go into the history of something that's not a video game and then break down a bunch of video games, which is what we're going to do. The X-Men were first introduced in the 1963 comic of the name The X-Men. The team of the X-Men was created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and published by Marvel Comics. For those who don't know about the X-Men for whatever reason, the original story and much of the later stories involves a group of students who attend Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. The original team from the 60s consisted of Cyclops, aka Scott Summers, who has the ability to shoot optic kinetic blasts, Iceman, aka Bobby Drake, who initially appears as a very ugly looking snowman who wears yellow boots and then later got real smooth, Angel, aka Warren Worthington III, who's a wealthy kid who has angel wings.
And also believes that he is the best thing ever.
Yes. There's Beast, aka Dr. Henry McCoy, who's an incredibly acrobatic man who has similar proportions to a gorilla and later turns blue, but is not originally blue. In fact, when he originally shows up, he has no hair at all.
From my recollection, Beast does not turn blue in the X-Men continuity.
Yeah, it happens like outside of it, doesn't it? I think it did Hulk comic.
So in Amazing Adventures Volume 2, number 11, he turns gray.
Oh, yes, okay.
And then they realized that gray kind of looks bad in color, and so then he became a blue.
Yes, yeah.
Because they were like, they would use blue highlighting to do shadows and stuff like that, and eventually it just became blue. But he changed in Amazing Adventures. But he was being written in X-Men, so I believe 72 would have had towards the time period when
72 was, and we'll talk about it, was when X-Men the comic had stopped already.
They stopped because it was bad.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't sell well, and then they rebooted it again in 74.
Right.
Beast won't rejoin the original X-Men team until the X-Men get rebooted for like their third big time.
Yeah, the 90s?
In 91, yeah. So like there's three essentially big eras of X-Men. There's like Silver Age X-Men era, which is like the original cast, which Zach's talking about. The Bronze Age X-Men, which is the new X-Men, which we'll talk about later, I assume, with Storm and Nightcrawler and those guys. And then the 90s X-Men, which is when like that's like the cartoon is with Beast and Gambit and Rogue and all those guys.
Now, rounding out the team would be Marvel Girl, aka Jean Grey, who is really only referred to as Marvel Girl in this original Silver Age run. They mostly drop the name, probably to avoid confusion with Captain Marvel and Miss Marvel, who were two characters that were also running in Marvel continuity. And Jean Grey is a young girl who has psychic powers and catches the eye of the other X-Men and their headmaster.
That's right, who is not 17.
No, their headmaster is Professor Charles Xavier, or Professor X, a psychic who is also a wheelchair user and is bald and kind of a creep in pretty much every version of the comic.
Yeah, Professor Xavier, if you read through the original comics, and so I've read half of all the Silver Age comics, and I've read a good start of the Bronze Age comics, and I'm sure if you're listening out there, you've read more X-Men than me, you would agree Professor Xavier is kind of a jerk, and he's kind of a weird man when it comes to his love of women. A lot of, especially early Silver Age, there is a lot of all of the X-Men men like to hit on Jean.
Literally the first comic they all watch her get changed.
Yes, and they are all super excited. She ends up falling for Scott and Wolverine and Mary Scott in the end.
There's some confusing stuff that happens with a clone of her, but we don't have to get too deep into the Madeline Pryor stuff.
Ultimately, it's always a love triangle between, and sometimes a love square is really what happens.
Now, all these characters have these amazing abilities, and these abilities are caused by a mutation that is found in their genes. Professor Xavier believes that the mutants should be able to harness their abilities to help mankind. Meanwhile, there is a rival group called the Brotherhood of Mutants, which plans to do evil with their abilities. This Brotherhood consists of Magneto, Mastermind, Toad, Quicksilver, and the Scarlet Witch, though Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch would quickly leave the Brotherhood of Mutants as they would be introduced as Avengers characters later on. The stories in even the early X-Men would often deal with topics revolving around prejudice against mutants, often as a pretty strong allegory for racism. In a lot of modern interpretations of the characters, at least comparing their later versions, Professor X is often compared to Martin Luther King Jr., and Magneto is often compared to Malcolm X. Both of them want what's best for the people they care about, but they go about it in their own means. Professor X tends to be on a more peaceful side of things, and Magneto tends to be on a more aggressive side of things.
The initial run of comics for X-Men ran from 1963 to 1970. The original stories never quite were as popular as the other Marvel runs at the time, like the Avengers or the Amazing Spider-Man. And between 1970 and 1975, issues 67 through 93, the X-Men solely consisted of reprints of older materials, and there weren't any new stories featuring the team. They would occasionally make appearances in other comics throughout the 1970s, with Beast even getting a short standalone story, as we talked about in Amazing Adventures in 1972, but the story of X-Men was mostly finished until 1975. Here comes 1975, and Giant Size X-Men #1 by Len Wein and Dave Cockrum hit the shelves. This comic revamped the team and made them international. The breakdown of the new team would be Cyclops from the USA, Thunderbird, who was Native American, Sunfire from Japan, Banshee from Ireland, Wolverine from Canada, Storm from Kenya, Nightcrawler from Germany, and Colossus from Russia. Following this issue, Chris Claremont would begin writing the series in issue 94 and made the decision to have the majority of the original team members from 1960s run leave the team with the exception of Cyclops, and would introduce new characters such as Moira McTaggart, the Shi'ar aliens, and the reintroduction of Marvel Girl as the Phoenix. Also to be noted, Sunfire joins the X-Men only for Giant Size. He leaves in Giant Size at the end, I'm pretty sure. And also in the Giant Size X-Men, they rescue the original team of Angel, except Beast. They don't rescue Beast. Beast tells them that there's a problem because Beast is part of the Avengers at the time. So he's already left. So he's now part of the Avengers. So he calls them and says he's found the other ones. So that's Angel, Jean, Iceman. So they rescue the original team minus Beast because Beast wasn't there, and they then combine with this new team. So then you have like 10 of them or 12 of them, and they're like, what do we do now? And then after every large Giant Size issue of comics, when there's a massive team up, there's always the HR issue where they go through and they trim the team down back to the original team. Happened with the Avengers and Giant Size Avengers, happens with Giant Size X-Men, where they go through and they're like, all right, who's actually on the team? And they reset the team essentially from the Giant Size issue for the future issues going forward. So Sunfire quit immediately, and Thunderbird dies pretty quick. And then Chris Claremont then wrote a giant goodbye for Jean Grey, and then immediately brought her back 2 issues later, and then just wrote her back into the comics.
Yeah.
So it was strange.
Classic.
She's like, I'm leaving forever, and then then they're dropping Professor X off at the airport. And Moira McTaggart and Jean Grey are both redheads. So it's incredibly, when I was reading the issue that they dropped Jean, with Jean's going to the airport, I thought Moira McTaggart was there, and then they were calling her Jean. And then I just thought I thought they were typoed her and thought they were actually referring to Moira, but it was actually Jean and Moira wasn't there. And then I was confused and I had to look it up, and somebody had to explain, yes, it's just weird that they wrote this weird goodbye and then they never really said goodbye. And what ended up happening was, from my understanding, is that Marvel generally likes to have their characters active in comics, and they did not have Jean active in another comic. So Iceman and Angel went off to join the Defenders, so they were getting written in the Defenders, and Beast was written in the Avengers. So they were all in their own little comic worlds, and Cyclops was staying with the X-Men, and so then Jean was just kind of by herself, so they just whooped her back into the X-Men to keep writing for her, and then kind of evolved her from Marvel Girl to Phoenix, which really kind of brings her into her own, as the Phoenix storyline is interesting for sure. I've been digging the Phoenix storyline. I think it's so out there. It's kind of odd. But reading the X-Men series, and where they go to the Shi'ar aliens and stuff like that, and they run into the Spelljammers and the Royal Guard of the Shi'ar aliens. It was during the heyday of Star Trek. So you could see issues of the comic panels that are just them wearing Star Trek uniforms, essentially, and reenacting Star Trek. And it was, I feel like, a way that Marvel was trying to get that Star Trek audience to be like, hey, look, this comic's actually space themed because you like space themed, because Star Trek's really popular right now. And so I think that's kind of funny that comics, because they're written very periodically, because they're periodical, that they tend to reflect what's going on in the world in them at that moment in time. So if you read comics from the 70s, they kind of reflect what was going on in the 70s. You read comics today, they're going to kind of reflect what's going on today, which is kind of cool that they're kind of like a time capsule of the era, dressed up in mutant powers. Also, Nightcrawler does some shape-shifting using an image inducer that he eventually forgets that he has by Iron Man, because he uses it for a good portion of Chris Claremont's run. And then when there's a point in time where he changes, Dave Cochran kind of rolls off and they get a new artist, and they kind of forget, Nightcrawler just kind of forgets that he has he puts on outfits of people that would be like Groucho Marx, or people that were topical for impersonation. Was in the Claremont era, where some of the major X-Men storylines, which are often considered some of the best comic storylines, would actually play out. Two of these would be the Dark Phoenix saga and the Days of Future Past, both of which have been influential on outside media that would later surround the franchise of the X-Men. It's also a really good point to say, people who are Gen X, these tend to be their X-Men. People who are millennials tend to be more of the 90s X-Men. And the people who are in the older generation, the baby boomers, tend to be more associated with Silver Age.
So Claremont would leave in the 1990s, but X-Men didn't stop being good. Storylines like Fatal Attractions, The Phalanx, Covenant, and Age of Apocalypse would all be run through the early part of the 1990s. And it was in this era, the 1990s, where we really began to see the X-Men as a franchise outside of just a comic. Now, the X-Men weren't strangers to television. In fact, the earliest appearance of the characters was in Marvel Superheroes in 1966, in an episode that featured the original lineup of the 60s X-Men. However, they weren't called X-Men, they were called the Allies for Peace. Don't know why. Now, in the 1980s, they did receive proper appearance with their actual name in an episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, though it was only in a flashback about the origins of Iceman, and they would later appear outside of a flashback alongside Spider-Man and his titular amazing friends of Firestar and Iceman in another episode called A Firestar is Born, which is a combination of an origin story for Firestar and also an episode that features Professor X, Storm, Angel, Cyclops, Wolverine, and they fight Juggernaut. Seth and I quote this episode constantly.
Knowing the lineup of X-Men, this is just an interesting group of X-Men, because they introduced Wolverine if he was new. He was new at one point in time. Storm is also new, but she's not introduced as new. She's just kind of always... Oh, no. Or do they introduce her as new? I think they do, maybe.
They actually might. Yeah, they might introduce her.
So they introduce
Storm. Yes,
because
Cyclops says these are our two
new X-Men. They say, here are our two new X-Men, Storm and Wolverine. And Wolverine's Wolverine's a nice guy, which he's not in the comics. He's kind of...
He's also Australian for some
And
reason.
he's also very Australian.
How you doing? Want a piece of fruit?
And then Angel isn't part of the X-Men at this time.
No.
So like but he's still part of the X-Men in his classic X-Men, like his classic Angel uniform, which is
he's like dressed like classic Angel. Yeah.
yeah, with like new Storm and Wolverine outfits, and then the Juggernaut shows up. And my favorite part, I think, of this entire cartoon, we recently rewatched specifically the Firestar episode on Christmas Day as a Christmas Day tradition. My favorite part of it is when Juggernaut runs into Spider-Man and Juggernaut monologues his entire history to Spider-Man for no reason.
Could we possibly talk this over?
I will destroy my stepbrother Charles Xavier and his juvenile band of X-Men. I am the one who found the lost temple of Cyttorak. I am the one who stole its mystic power. That power transforms me into the human Juggernaut, the only one who can destroy the X-Men.
And Spider-Man's like, okay, dude, and then he gets crushed under a building. Also, Juggernaut, through the comics, he is just a silly character, and I think that it comes off like, I don't know, when I was a kid, I always thought the Juggernaut was like a really cool, like, scary character. Like, I always felt like he was just like intimidating and imposing. But going back and reading Juggernaut comics specifically, especially like his introduction in early comics, he's just kind of a silly dude.
He's very silly,
especially his love affair with Black Tom Cassidy or whatever.
Yeah, he loves Black Tom Cassidy.
Yeah, Black Tom Cassidy.
Is Banshee's brother?
Cousin,
yes.
Black Tom Cassidy, who's related to Banshee, who is not in this cartoon.
No, yeah. It is a weird blend though of that like 60s X-Men and the Claremont X-Men.
Yes, it is. It's just a weird right on the cusp where they're like, they just include the ones that are cool. No Colossus, no Nightcrawler, just Storm and Wolverine, who I guess are the two most powerful of the new ones.
So the X-Men would appear one more time in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends in an episode that I haven't watched because I've only ever watched the Firestar episode, to be honest. But this episode is called The X-Men Adventure and does include Nightcrawler, Colossus, Thunderbird, and Sprite, aka Kitty Pryde, who join Professor X and Cyclops. I don't think Wolverine or Storm show up in this one, or Angel. So there's a new roster again with them.
In 1989, Marvel got the idea to do an X-Men TV show and produced a half-hour pilot called Pride of the X-Men, which featured the team going against Magneto, White Queen, Blob, Pyro, and Juggernaut, also known as the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. However, no one would end up picking up the show, which is a tragedy because the art style and the whole group of X-Men, because that was like Kitty Pryde, and it has like Dazzler and Storm, and as we will talk later, the same X-Men from an arcade game that goes on to be inspired by this. That team, I really like that team of X-Men, which doesn't really, I mean, it's that kind of like weird blend where some people are in and some people are out. The pilot, however, did lay down the groundwork for some of the earliest of X-Men video games. One of the first games based on the characters was the 1989 The Uncanny X-Men for the NES, produced by LJN. The team of Storm, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Iceman, Colossus, and Wolverine were intentionally picked to match the plot of Pride of the X-Men, it's a great team. It's a top-down game where you play as different members of the team, and in one-player mode, the AI will control the second player, usually badly. You walk from one end of the screen to the other, almost like a vertical shooter, and you have to blast at various enemies you encounter. You have an unlimited amount of punches, but your mutant ability is limited and can kill you if you use it up, which does happen in the comics sometimes. And the Uncanny X-Men is fairly notorious for being one of the worst video games on the NES. It's just a bad game. Reportedly, the original developer is still not entirely known, though suspected to be a Japanese studio called Bothtech. Some point to another studio called Pixel. However, it's just not a good game.
Yeah, no one's fussing up to making it either. So, like, people don't quite know who made it, and no one says, we made it. But LJN didn't credit the developers. So,
And you played this game, didn't you?
I did play this game because Seth made me play through a lot of the older X-Men games for our Retro Rewind. I think I in turn made him play a bunch of X-Men games, or at least I had him play a bunch of Wolverine games because I think he played Adamantium Rage. Anyway, in my own words, when I tried playing the practice stage, I couldn't figure out how to leave the practice stage, so I reset the game. I then loaded another level and proceeded to get incredibly overwhelmed. It's just a very frustrating game. As Seth noted, the AI is completely unresponsive for your allies, and the AI also behaves differently no matter the character you pick. So like Cyclops will just like spam his punches, and like I think Nightcrawler just like walks away. Like just goes off screen and just vanishes. So the AI is not great. It's not a good game. And immediately following the release of the Uncanny X-Men for the NES was another interesting game, and that was X-Men Madness in Murder World for the Amiga C64 and MS-DOS, released by Paragon Software. This game was also one that I played. It features Colossus, Dazzler, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Storm, and Wolverine going against Magneto and Arcade. Arcade being one of those reoccurring villains who shows up every now and then, and he's very into video games and pinball machines. So like he was originally into non-video games, but then video games started becoming a thing, and then he got really into video games. I remember Madness in Murder World being okay. I remember the music being really annoying because it was Rise of the Gladiators, but played with like chiptune music and not very well. However, at the time of its release, it did get received positively. One magazine, Compute, rated it 4 out of 5 stars at least. The sequel, Seth also had me play, which was X-Men 2 Fall of the Mutants for MS-DOS. From my Retro Rewind, back when Seth had me play it, I talked about how it is based on the crossover story of Fall of the Mutants, where the X-Men get caught up in this whole thing with the Freedom Force, the Watcher, and the Adversary. And in the game, you walk around with your X-Men from a top-down perspective, and you go into these 2D segments where you beat people up. I don't remember this one being very good. There's also like random encounters where you're pitted against a single enemy, with each hero having to defeat that single enemy. Almost like a fighting game mode that just randomly happens. Interesting idea, to have the Freedom Force, who are primarily like they are a villain team, to kind of like combine with the X-Men a bit, because they're sort of fighting them, but they're also trapped on a different planet. So it's I think that's an alternate timeline or something. It's a very strange story.
I was looking up about Arcade in general, the villain, and somebody had like a really good description of him, that he's just the Riddler for Marvel. Kind of, a villain who does overly complicated things to fight people, and ultimately is pretty underpowered. In 1992, a beautiful thing happened. Konami released the X-Men for the arcades, and this game is by far incredible. It's one of the best beat-em-up games around, and if you don't have fond memories of playing it, go find it in the wild and develop fond memories of playing it. It's a side-scrolling beat-em-up featuring Cyclops, Colossus, Wolverine, Storm, Nightcrawler, and Dazzler going against the Brotherhood of Evil again, Pyro, Blob, White Queen, Juggernaut, Magneto, Mystique, and for some reason, Wendigo and Nimrod.
Yeah. Arguably also, it's always odd Juggernaut is in the Brotherhood of Mutants, because he's not a mutant.
No, but he hangs out with them.
He does hang out with them, but he is not a mutant.
But he's their buddy.
He is their buddy.
Wendigo is also not a mutant.
There's Nimrod.
Yes. I think isn't Nimrod an alien?
He's a powerful, virtually indestructible descendant of the Sentinels. He's a future Sentinel.
And Wendigo's a curse.
Yes. Yeah. Wendigo is a curse.
And he just goes,
Wendigo!
The designs of the game were all based on the designs from the pilot of Pride of the X-Men. Infamously, the game also had some weirdly translated audio clips, such as Magneto saying,
X-Men, welcome to die!
It's a great game that Zach and I always play when we see an open machine, because you got to. It's fantastic. The same year that the X-Men arcade game released, so did... X-Men, the animated series on Fox. If our listeners aren't familiar with X-Men through the comics or movies, I would hope you have at least some memories of the show, because this show was arguably incredibly important to making X-Men into the household name that it was and is through the 1990s into the early 2000s. The show laid the groundwork for the franchise to be popular enough to convince Fox to produce the film that would release in 2000 and cement the classic design of the characters into everyone's mind. So if you ever wonder why Cyclops is always drawn with the dumb yellow bandolier and the blue skin-tight suit, it's because of the show. And just like Gambit, it's got the purple thing going on with his chest.
Yeah,
Not
Gambit
sure what that
is
is.
purple thing. Characters like Jubilee.
The very unclear reason why Rogue it can fly and has super strength, and also does not have flying and super strength in the X-Men movie. And the reason for that is at one point in time, Rogue was on the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants because her mother is Mystique. And
Yes, yep.
when she was an evil mutant, she fought Captain Marvel, and she killed Captain Marvel. She essentially killed Captain Marvel. She drained Captain Marvel's powers to the point where she was kind of left as a kind of like a husk that they left under a bridge. And eventually Captain Marvel, she kind of got better. She got hit with some cosmic rays that turned her into binary, and so then she became a different superhero. But Rogue maintained the powers from Captain Marvel of flying and super strength forever.
Right, yeah. It really was an influential show.
It's good, too. It's a good show.
It is a solid show, and X-Men 97 is a great follow-up. It really is because we had X-Men the animated series that we got the movies, and thus we have the characters coming back after all these years. In terms of the games, though, the show's aesthetics were used for the cover art and roster of the game Spider-Man and X-Men in Arcade's Revenge, which was a Sega Genesis game. It's an interesting game because while the cover art is all from X-Men the animated series style of drawings, the sprite work is different. Cyclops wears an all blue but with a white X going across his chest, and Wolverine is in his brown design. They're not quite in their X-Men the animated series costumes in the game, but the art style for the promotional stuff was. The gameplay itself of Spider-Man and the X-Men in Arcade's Revenge has you playing as Spider-Man and rescuing different members of the X-Men as you travel through Murder World, a simulated world created by Arcade. It was released on the SNES, the Game Boy, and the Sega Genesis and Game Gear. We own the Sega Genesis version. It is okay, though there are better X-Men games on the Genesis. In fact, one of those better games was just called X-Men, and was released in 1993 for the Sega Genesis. You can either play as Gambit, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, or Cyclops, with Storm, Rogue, Iceman, and Archangel all appearing to assist you, and Jean Grey shows up if you fall off a cliff. I do want to make a note. Archangel is Angel, who we've already talked about, but he turned bad because an Egyptian god mutant showed up and turned him into one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse.
But then he got better, but he didn't
did
get better.
He became good.
Also, that happened before 91.
It did, yeah.
Yes, the apocalypse plot happens before the 91 relaunch of X-Men.
Yes,
because if you read the 91 relaunch of X-Men, Archangel is Archangel, and there's no explaining why he's Archangel. So you have to actually go back in time to read a bit more if you want to know why. If you read Silver Age and then all of a sudden 91 Age, why all of a sudden Angel goes from being a rich Ponce to being a weird blue man
with robot wings.
With robot wings, arguably enhancing him because he was kind of lame before.
Yeah, he went from being able to just fly to being able to shoot metal daggers from his wings.
I think he shoots missiles.
Yeah, I think he does also shoot missiles. Crazy. I love Archangel. The game X-Men for the Sega Genesis, the one released in 93, takes place primarily in the Danger Room. And for those unaware, the Danger Room is basically the holodeck from Star Trek, but in X-Men. In the game, the Danger Room gets a virus and the safety limits are disabled, which is also a plot that frequently happens in Star Trek. And the X-Men must then go through the dangers of the Danger Room before they do eventually encounter Magneto, who's revealed to be the one who put a virus in the system, which doesn't feel like something Magneto would ever do, but whatever, it's a video game.
A fun fact about this game is that it requires you to reset the console at one point. When you are in a world based on Mojo World, you have to reset the game in order to get to the next level. This is really fun for our version of the game, as our Sega Genesis had a broken reset switch. It's a fun game, but nowhere near as nostalgic as its sequel, X-Men 2: The Clone Wars. Probably next to the arcade game, one of the best video games out there. Probably one of the only Sega Genesis games that I have ever played that begins with a cold open, where you turn on the game and you're just put into a level and you don't even get the Sega logo title until you beat this level. So if you're bad at beating the level, or you get a really crappy character, you don't even get to pick your character until you beat the level, then you're not even seeing the logo. You are assigned a random X-Men in the beginning, though you can later swap characters after you beat the level. The roster of playable characters at the start of the game are Beast, Cyclops, Gambit, Nightcrawler, Psylocke, and Wolverine, which is a pretty great cast of characters. After you fight him in later missions, you can unlock Magneto. There's also a cheat code to unlock him earlier, I think, or you can, who flies around and blasts enemies with energy and is pretty overpowered.
The plot of X-Men 2 Clone Wars involves a virus being spread by the Phalanx, which contaminates a Sentinel facility, then contaminates Avalon, which is Magneto's home, and then contaminates Apocalypse's facility. Apparently, when it gets to Apocalypse's facility, they try to stop the virus from spreading, and Apocalypse is like, whatever, just let it spread. It's a great game. If you love the X-Men, you should definitely play it. And apparently, there was going to be a follow-up to it that we never got. A fourth game for the Sega Genesis called X-Woman, the Sinister Virus, was planned but canceled. This title would have featured Storm, Jean Grey, and Rogue, and you would have to fight Mr. Sinister, who has sent a disease that only targets male mutants. The SNES also got an X-Men game called Mutant Apocalypse, released in 1994, which features you playing as Beast, Cyclops, Gambit, Psylocke, or Wolverine, as you go through different levels and fight off random bad guys before eventually going to Avalon and fighting Magneto. I've played this game once. I played it on an emulator, and I remember being okay. I also remember being very disappointed it wasn't Clone Wars, because when I played this game on an emulator, I played it when I was young. We had this game on a CD that Seth had burned with a SNES 9X and a bunch of random ROMs. And I loaded the CD into our dad's computer, and I booted up SNES 9X, and I was like, I'm going to play one of these games on here. And I saw a game just labeled X-Men, and I said to myself, oh man, if this is anything like X-Men Clone Wars, this is going to be a great game. And it's nothing like X-Men Clone Wars, and it made me sad. I assume it's still a decent game. It's just nothing like X-Men Clone Wars. Seth also has this game on his X-Men Arcade 1-Up cabinet, which also contains other X-Men fighting games, like the ones we talked about when we did an episode on Marvel vs. Capcom. But yeah, Seth, down in where your Arcade 1-Up is stored. Basement. Down in the vault, the Classic Gaming Brothers vault, where you store your Arcade 1-Up that no one else is allowed to touch. You could play Mutant Apocalypse. Now, one of the last X-Men games that was released before the movies came out, starting in 2000, was X-Men Ravages of Apocalypse, which is in fact a Quake mod developed by Zero Gravity Entertainment in 1997. I want to repeat that. It is a Quake mod, as in the first-person shooter Quake. It is one of the first total conversion mods that use the property like the X-Men. I think it's also one of the only, and it had 14 levels, all new weapons and enemies, and you play as just some dude who is not like an X-Men character, but has guns, and you have to fight X-Men robot clones who have mutant powers. And sometimes there'll be more than one of these X-Men robot clones, as Seth will talk about in a second.
Yeah, I played this game a while back, and this game is not great. I do not believe that it held up. First off, you are looking to play a 90s first-person shooter, just play Quake or Doom or Wolfenstein. They have all hold up better than this mod. This is due to the fact that the weapons that were new were horribly designed and underpowered, and the enemies were overpowered. You also had to hit the enemies precisely. So picture this. You are equipped with a slow-shooting, single-shot rifle, and you are in a room with 4 Cyclopses, because all the enemies are X-Men who have mutant powers, and they can be the same X-Men, and they can all shoot their laser blasts out of their eyes with a short downtime, and then you're dead. This is, in fact, the third room that you enter. So even if you love X-Men, this is a solid pass. If you want more content for Quake, grab Scourge of Argamon or Dissolution of Eternity. Following this game, there would be some downtime before the next set of X-Men games would release, which would be tie-into movies. While not all of the later X-Men games have been connected to the movies, the aesthetic slowly shifted away from the 1990s TV show, sadly, and soon became a bit more in line with shows like X-Men Evolution. In fact, one game, X-Men Dimensions, would feature artwork that was similar to X-Men Evolution, but also the voice acting of Patrick Stewart as Charles Xavier, reprising his role for the movies. Another game like X-Men Mutant Academy would allow players to wear costumes similar to their movie counterparts or their comic book designs, and eventually the movies will have the comic book design
Yes.
In terms of future content, Wolverine is due out in sometime in the future. Reportedly, there may be an X-Men game in the works slated for like 2030. Without going too deep into it, Wolverine has his own line of games going all the way back to 1991 on the NES, and maybe we'll do an episode just on Wolverine. Many of his games are bad.
Yeah.
Including some of the more modern ones. So maybe we will do one.
His games are bad, but they're weirdly interesting. Like, one of them is based on X2, the movie. But it doesn't directly follow the plot of X2, and in fact, like, features characters that are not in X2, like Wendigo. But also, I'm pretty sure there was a deleted scene from the Wolverine game, the X2 Wolverine game, where he meets Spider-Man. Which definitely didn't happen in the movie.
But they've met each other before.
If you want to pretend like those movies are set in the same universe as with Spider-Man also existing. I know they tried their best not to ever reference them. I guess now they all exist because they're all owned by
in the
mouse.
comics they've met before.
Yes, in the comics they met before. And they usually get... and actually, they usually don't get along, I don't think. Because
Wolverine gets tired of Spider-Man's wisecracking antics.
Wolverine probably thinks Spider-Man's like a PG-rated Deadpool.
Wolverine hates everybody except Jean Grey.
It's Cyclops sometimes. Well, that will do it for our X-Men episode. It was fun to relive these memories, and it got me really wanting to rewatch X-Men 97 and also the classic show. In that Firestar is Born episode, I just want to keep watching that over and over again. Juggernaut! Such a classic episode. To get into our retro rewind, Seth had me play a game called Albion, developed by Blue Byte in 1995 for MS-DOS. It's an RPG set in the planet of Albion, where you play as a guy named Driscoll, who crash lands on the planet with a government agent named Rainer Hofstede. Driscoll comes from a spaceship that is populated by a bunch of people, including government agents, who are called Snoopies. I don't know. They don't really explain the language. Anyway, you crash land on this planet and you encounter tall alien cat people, and at some point you encounter the Celts, as in the people from ancient times who occupied Ireland and England, the actual Celts. It's an odd game with some very interesting artwork, and it's pretty interactive, I felt. You collect random items that you find, you can chat with random people that you encounter. It feels very open for what it was. However, after playing it for a bit, I realized I hadn't gotten into any combat yet, and I'd been playing the game for like 40 minutes. Maybe I'm just bad at it, but like, I feel like usually RPGs put you in some form of combat earlier than that, just to get you like acquainted with the gameplay style, even if it's just like a tutorial, or like your character gets sent to like a range or something, you know, like they're like, oh, you know, go clear out the rats in the basement sort of deal. None of that. So I was like, I'm getting into this game and I have not fought a single person yet, and that is a lot. Do I think Albion holds up? Yeah, I guess so. If you like weird sci-fi cat ladies and also dudes who look like Jesus, then I think you would also like Albion. Also, if you like the Celts, for some reason you're like, hey, I wonder what it would be like if the Celts enter a time portal and ended up on a planet far away with cat people. This game was made for you. Seth, I want you to play a game called Yes, Prime Minister, the computer game for MS-DOS.
Oh, great. I think I actually might have played that game already. Zach had me play Shadowcaster, which was developed by Raven Software and published by Origin Systems in 1993. Shortly after Electronic Arts bought them, so they had in the intro of the game Origin Systems, an electronics arts company. You play as a guy named Kurt, which I'm not really sure how you know that his name is Kurt, except that maybe the game came with a manual. I certainly didn't know his name was Kurt. He's a member of a shapeshifting race, and you can unlock his shapeshifting abilities by collecting obelisks. The first one you collect is Mallorin, which is a cat creature with 4 arms and brown fur, wearing what can only be described as a wrestling belt and a red loincloth. And this is where I kind of got to, where I was running around as the Mallorin, beating up on all the enemies, which was fun. And without a manual, the intro's a little obtuse, since it just kind of cold opens you into a room with a monster, and it's not really intuitive that you need to click on an obelisk and there's a locked door. So for a while I just thought I was in prison forever, but eventually I clicked on the obelisk, it turned me into a Mallorin, and I was like, oh, I guess it's cat shifting time. And I want you to know that I looked up all the other forms because I wanted to know what they were, and now everyone will know what they were. So one of them, there is a form that's called the Cown, which looks like a 1-foot-tall buff dude who is also wearing a loincloth that looks similar to the Mallorin, except if he was the size of a leprechaun. Another form called the Kapha, which is an amphibian lizard that is humanoid, that has fins under its arms and is green and wears a blue wrestling belt. There is Cessair, which is what I can only describe as a dragon mermaid, and if the top part was a demon man and the bottom part was just a dragon tail, it looks just odd, like somebody stitched it together. And there is the Grost form, which is just a giant stone statue that is very, very detailedly ripped. As Zach noted, that he was very detailed except for a certain part of him. And finally, this is the creature that actually caused me to look up what the other forms looked like, because it was called an opus, and the description of it was a tentacle gazer, and I didn't know what that meant. So I had to find a picture to figure out what a tentacle gazer is, and I now know what they kind of mean, but essentially is a flying brain creature with 2 tentacles and a giant eye and a mouth. Kind of like a beholder if it looked dumb. Also, just so you know, the Kapha, the Grost, and the Opus aren't wearing any clothes. But the game is fun. In a classic dungeon crawling RPG light style game where you pick up items, you open doors, and you kill monsters, all from a first person perspective. I think it holds up personally. And next week, Zach, you can play first person pinball for MS-DOS.
That sounds great. Well, thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. If you have any fun memories of the X-Men, be sure to email us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on our website, www.classicgamingbrothers.com. We're available on our social media, Classic Gaming Brothers or CG Brothers Pod, or you can find us on Patreon. That's where we are now. We're on Patreon. And of course, we're on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.